There are a number of topics at the intersection of science and religion that I'd love to talk with you about, ask you about, but one that comes to mind and that we've already poked at is miracles. And forgive me, I probably have a couple minutes worth of things to say before we get started. But in one sense of the term miracle, an event is miraculous if it's simply a very low probability. So maybe we might want to say, in keeping with our physics discussion, that the birth of a Boltzmann brain is miraculous. But while Boltzmann brains pose their own conceptual problems in a bounded universe with random motion, they're not unexpected. But on the other hand, a miracle could also refer to an event that maybe somehow transcends causation or the laws of physics. And this seems to be in conflict with some core assumptions of science. So what I wonder is how, as a Christian, you look at a purported miracle like Jesus walking on water or turning wine into blood or the resurrection, which we've already mentioned. And if you take these things literally, which I think at least the resurrection, you take literally, how you square it with your understanding of science as something that is concerned with laws, with causation, some sort of rigidity, maybe determinacy.
Yeah. Okay, well, in order to do that, I need to say a few things about what I think science is.
Please.
I think science and physics, one of the sciences, is about understanding the reproducible behavior of the universe. So the way science works is by doing experiments and discovering phenomena and trends in the data and correlations and so forth that are reproducible. And actually, in order to know that they're reproducible, you have to have a special kind of clarity about the way you describe them. And so science also requires a kind of discipline of clarity. In physics, that's predominantly achieved by mathematics, but in other disciplines, there are other ways in which we achieve clarity about the reproducibility of experiments. And I don't mean just that we have to be able to do experiments over and over again at will. So this reproducibility is important also in observational sciences like astronomy. So in astronomy, we don't literally do experiments on stars. What we do is we do repeated measurements on those stars, and that's what astronomy does. Or in its more primitive form, we look up to the sky and we see these reproducible distributions of bright lights, which are stars, and we try to understand them, and that's what science is basically about: this reproducibility. But there is an outlook that's very widespread in our society and in our thinking today, that because of science's great power that's been demonstrated through centuries of successful description of the universe, discovering these reproducibilities, that science is really all the real knowledge there is. And that's an outlook which I call scientism. It's widely called scientism. So it puts science on a pedestal and says science is all the real knowledge there is, and everything else is sort of speculation or wishful thinking or something like that, or just vagueness. So I don't subscribe to scientism. I think there are lots of things we know about the world that are not, in the first place, reproducible, because lots of things in our world are not reproducible. For one example is human history. Human history is full of unreproducible events. We can't go back and reobserve them. We can't go back and redo things. And therefore, there are lots of perfectly respectable disciplines which are not like natural science, that are not based on reproducibility, and to take an example, the historical example, which is based on examining documents and thinking about the plausibility of the times and how people thought and so forth, is an example of something which isn't a science. History is not a science, and so I don't, when I talked about the evidence of the resurrection, it's not scientific evidence, okay? I'm the first to admit that, okay? But if you take the view that science is all the real knowledge there is, then you naturally take the view that, well, religious or spiritual experiences are, not real. They're not about knowledge. They're about emotion or something else that's going on. Okay, so to get back to miracles, if you think that, first of all, physics and so forth talks about the way that the world works when it's behaving reproducible. And we think that the laws of physics are amazingly consistent. And therefore that, basically most things that happen in the world are in fact in accordance with the laws of physics as we understand them. So the question then arises, can anything happen that is not consistent with the laws of physics or the laws of what we discover about the world generally through science? And the answer is that logically, you can't rule out the possibility that there are things that happen that are not in accordance with what we discover from doing reproducible experiments or observations. So logically, miracles are not ruled out by modern science. Now, maybe they're made less plausible by modern science than they seemed to be to people in the 1st century or the 10th century before Christ, for that matter, or whenever, or let's say in medieval Europe, okay? But, and in fact, I think it's a good policy, generally speaking, to say that when people are claiming that there's something that happens in contradiction of the laws of physics or the laws of science, one should be immediately skeptical. And I am. I generally am quite skeptical of things that purport to be different. But I don't think it's logically ruled out. And I think that there are, on occasions, things that happen that we don't have any explanation for, that is, along the lines of the normal operation of the world. It might be thought that it's sort of somehow improper that God would set up a world where he's allowed to break the laws, okay? But I think that actually that's thinking about the relationship between the creator and the creation that is not consistent with the Christian view. The Christian view is actually that the world is continually sustained by God, that God, in a certain sense, holds the universe in his palm, and that if he didn't continue to sustain it, it wouldn't have the regularities that we observe. And so if that is really the right way to think about God, then even though God, as a good ruler, is very consistent about the way he rules his universe, nevertheless, he isn't prevented from behaving in a way that is different and allowing something to be different from the usual way in which the universe proceeds. And so that is the sense in which I am comfortable with the idea that, science is basically extremely reliable, and insofar as we understand the reproducible nature of the world, science is the way we find out about that. But at the same time, there may well be, and indeed I think there are, events that take place that don't have any explanation that's in accordance with the usual way that the world behaves. That's basically the bottom line.